Welcome to this new episode of my photo selection for the month of February 2022. So as usual, every month I will be telling you anecdotes, technical details, maybe talk about some narrative experiments I've tried to do on photos I've taken during that month or photos I've edited during that month. So let's start. First two pictures. For those who've seen the previous months, I've been trying to understand this Voigtlander 35mm f1.4 Nokton V2 lens, a relatively classic lens construction, really open, that I use here on the Leica M240. Really trying to get used to the characteristics of the lens and its color rendering, its geometry. In the first two pictures on the left, that's a relatively slow shutter speed, probably 1/30th of a second or 1/15th of a second, trying to get a feel of this woman walking through my scene, trying to create some kind of story. Second picture, that's basically a street by night, trying to understand also the contrasts, the way the lens reacts to high contrast, and we see the color fringing and really this very typical characteristic color distortion in the high contrast zones by this lens. Again, when experimenting with a lens, it's a good occasion also to try new techniques, maybe give yourself some goals here. I thought, let's maybe try telling stories in two pictures, so diptychs. Here, again, a scene by night with artificial lighting. Basically, always was the Nokton 35mm and the M240. Trying to bring the eye of the viewer somewhere and try to imply a story. So first picture on the left, trying to get an overall idea of the scene, trying to compose something that reflects the feeling of the place I'm taking a picture of, and the second picture trying to focus on a detail and to try to create that dynamic dimension between the two pictures that would imply a story to the viewer. Same thing here in the next two pictures. Here I was actually documenting also this new neighborhood, which is named Praia Cassia Verne, which is being built around basically a big train station and some ex-industrial zones that are going to become new living spaces with lots of new buildings, also office buildings. It's a project, a friend who's got that project of bringing together an archive of the transformation of this new neighborhood. So here again, using the Nokton 35mm and trying to do something with a diptych. First picture on the left, trying to get an overall idea of the scene that I find quite interesting graphically, and then with the second picture on the right, trying to focus on a detail. Here adding this person walking with his bag, holding his bag, trying to create, to imply a story and try to bring the viewer to try to imagine something going on. So at the same time, it gives a good idea of the characteristics of this lens. Again, telling a story with two pictures, basically the same place. Here I've tried to bring in both of those images. I tried to recall the picture on the left in the picture of the right, simply because the buildings, they're the same buildings in the background, except on the left they're taken from one side of the train tracks, and on the other, on the right picture, taken from the left side of the tracks. Trying also to convey a story between the two pictures here, not by taking a detail from the first picture, but by using a character, which is this mom with her two babies with the trolley. You see her on the left forefront on the first picture, and then you see her in the background on the other side of the street on the second picture. trying to create dynamic moves in the story you tell, basically with a crossing of histories. One of that woman bringing her kids somewhere, and the other of passerbys going the other way around with this man holding his bag and waiting to cross the street, trying to create fluxes between those two pictures. So you can say a lot of things with two pictures. And that's just an example of how I practice. I'm not saying it works, but just to give you an idea, maybe give you ideas on how to experiment with new equipment. Here, the main goal is to understand that lens, but at the same time, you can practice other things. Same lens, always same neighborhood. Here, not the diptych, but simply working on the scenes and taking single photos. Trying here again to document the neighborhood with the public transportation, with this big bus going on front of the left picture, and basically a geometric construction in my picture using the train tracks and the electrical lines over those tracks. Same neighborhood, again here maybe working also on the diptych, trying to bring about movement and recalling some kind of geometry and patterns in the subject. On the left, it's basically a freeway that goes underneath the bridge I'm standing on when taking the picture, showing that flux of people into their cars, crossing below. And on the right, here's a building, for example, that's going to be destroyed to let place for a taller building in this new neighborhood. And trying to show the scale with this man also going somewhere, like the cars on the left, in one of the major axes of this neighborhood. Again, using always this lens. So I think that evening when I was walking around, actually, that's also a kind of street photography, even so it's not so human-centric. That gave me a good idea of how I could start using this lens in low light environments. So on those two images, I tried to create the sense of space. So how do you do that? On the left, creating that sense of space and scale by having this really large open space, which is going to let place to new buildings soon. And having those buildings in the back, in that case, that's Rolex watches headquarters that we see in the back. And there's basically a fence in front of me, and between this fence showing in a very blurry manner a kind of pattern on front of it, this wide open space and the buildings in the back, trying to give an idea of this sense of emptiness before the neighborhood is going to be built. And on the right, one of the main arteries of the current neighborhood, trying to give a sense of the scale of the buildings with this biker slightly blurred, because I'm probably using a 1/30th of a second speed on this one. Here I'm changing my technical apparatus on those two images. I've been also working with a large format camera, an Intrepid 4x5 camera, using I forgot what kind of lens. I know the lens. It's a Rodenstock. I think it's 150 millimeter 5.6 lens. Not sure about that. But I was trying to use a device which is named Lomograflok, made by Lomography, which lets you put Fujifilm Instax wide instant film behind. And I was trying to work with the bokeh of that lens, trying to do something in low light environments. So again, trying to experiment things, trying to understand basically here, one, the lens, the Rodenstock lens, trying to have fun with the large format camera, of course, and also trying to get a sense of the sensitivity of this 800 ISO equivalent instant film made by Fuji. Here are those two images. we are going to medium format digital photography. That's the Leica S006 body, using a Pentax 6.7 lens. Actually, two Pentax 6.7 lens. One is basically, I think, the 45 millimeter. It's a 45 millimeter 5.6. I'm really not sure about that. On the left, and on the right, it's a tail A lens. Basically, here I was trying to work with a diptych again, working with two images to tell a story. One being the food being prepared in a kitchen with these colors of those green and red vegetables. And the kitchens from afar, also the living rooms, the living spaces. Trying to work with, it's also, I like to practice with cameras, lenses, try to get a feel of them. Here's those next two pictures. It's with the M240 Leica body. Using, in that case, a lens that I'm starting to really enjoy, which is the Leica Summarit-M 50mm f2.5. Basically, it's not the most open lens I have, but it's got some really interesting bokeh characteristics and very precise. But being f2.5 with this relatively getting old camera, we can definitely see on the left pictures those vertical lines, which are basically noise patterns linked to the CMOS sensor of that camera and the image science behind. On the right, same lens. It's ice basically on bare soil. I found interesting the ice forming in those probably shoe and dog feet marks. Yeah, just experimenting again with equipment to try to understand how you can use it maybe in the future and try to make some interesting shots. Here again, kind of, I find those two images kind of boring. But yeah, but even if they're boring, kind of boring subjects to me, I try to, it's a good exercise too, to try to create something out of it. So on the left, it's a bus cleaning station. Basically, I like this yellow and black pattern. Again, here I'm using the Nokton 35. No, on the left, I'm using this Leica 50mm f2.5, and on the right, I'm using the Nokton 35mm f1.4. On the left, I really try to basically document this pattern and this feel of this bus cleaning station. And on the right, there's a festival named the Lumière Festival, the Festival of Lights, which has those huge articulated sculptures that are holding actually the bridge I'm walking on. It's in Geneva, and basically we have the Geneva Cathedral behind, and in mid field we have the Rousseau Island, which comes out like a ship on front. And yeah, I tried to make the most of that scene, trying also to understand this really open lens in a high light environment. In a low light, I kind of understood how it worked. I'm trying to use it under different circumstances. Here again, going back to diptych, I tried this month to work on dual pictures to tell or try to tell different stories. So here I tried using a Summaron 28mm f5.6 lens, which is an old vintage lens, using an SL2 camera, which is a really recent full-frame camera from Leica. I tried to create some kind of story, implicit story between the tree, the shadow coming from this really low-angle sunlight, and to try to create this kind of distorted geometry showing the projection of those shadows going further away. So it's actually almost like if I had a stitch picture. I tried to see if we could get something out of it. I kind of liked the result. I'm not saying it's phenomenal, but I found it interesting to try to work with this distorted, I would call geometric space. Basically, it would be a panoramic landscape photography kind of image, except it's made two portraits, and lacking some middle part and some real continuity in the geometry. Anyway, again, trying things, trying to bring some feelings out of the pictures I take. Working again on the diptych, trying to document spaces, and here trying to understand actually this Summaron 28mm f5.6 vintage lens in low light situation using this modern sensor camera, the SL2, trying to see how it reacts in those low lights. So that's basically an underground bicycle parking, trying to create the maximum feeling of the place using only two pictures. So pipes on the ceiling, the parking zone, nothing really unusual, but we can actually see a little bit of what comes out of that lens. Quite neutral actually, but an old rendering, old school rendering. Next two pictures. On the left, we're going back to the wide format camera, the Intrepid 4.5 with the Lomographlok back using Fujifilm Instax wide film. Again, with those blurry, working on the bokeh and this blurry geometry patterns. I've done that a few times during the months, trying to get used to recreate the same settings at different times. So that's not the same day as the first two pictures. A good exercise too, to try to, put your equipment back into its boxes or bags and then put them back out and try to re-render the same feel. And actually also learning, again, I'm going back to that, learning to use that equipment and to learning and getting used to the rendering I get overall. And on the right, again, the Nokton 35mm f1.4 lens, but this time on a Leica M8 CCD-based camera, which is a non-full frame. It's basically a micro four thirds kind of sensor. The first digital M series Leica, which is now pretty old, very bad low light sensitivity, but with this kind of lens, I wanted to see what it was able to get. So interesting color rendering and overall rendering. Then again, now I'm going back to the testing those new lenses for me, which is Leica Summarit-M 50mm f2.5 I've already talked about, on the SL2 body on the left. So it's a very, very, how would I say, very precise rendering and geometry. And on the right, here I'm testing same body, testing a lens which is the Lomography Atoll 17mm f2.8 lens. I'm definitely not someone who likes wide-angle lenses, so that to me was part of trying to learn how to use that kind of lens. Relatively wide aperture, very wide-angle lens. Very precise in geometry. I like the color rendering. I'm not saying I'm liking wide angles, but very good practice to me. I find it really interesting. It's really by practice that you get the feel of the equipment you use. Again, here on the left, the Atoll 17mm f2.8 Lomography wide angle, trying to work on scenes in scenes. When you get those really wide angles, you can really put a lot of stuff in your composition. So trying to do that. On the right, another lens, same body, SL2, but here it's an old vintage Summarit 50mm f1.5 was released in 1949 based on a design from 1936, which was the Leica Xenon lens. So it's basically really, really detailed in the center. The central zone is really well defined. But it was one of those old non-coated lens configuration. So it definitely goes blurry in the corners. Got a lot of vignetting, but it's really smooth. It's trying to use more of this lens, which I've had for a while, but have forgotten to use for a while too. So I took it with me. I've been doing a trip to California, to San Francisco. So tried to do the most of it. So here on the left, inside the plane, on the right, picture from the window plane of San Francisco, the Golden Gate down below. And you really see the characteristics on the second picture, on the one on the right. Obviously, there's the window in the plane, which brings your definition down and makes it a little bit more blurry. But the central definition is what really defines this lens. It gives it this kind of dreamy look. Pretty good geometry, by the way, on this lens, but very particular rendering with this lens. It's usually got a very swirly bokeh, but here we don't get it because it's more visible in close-ups. Here again, on the left, this Summarit 1.5 lens of the Bay of San Francisco. Actually, here it's a picture of the Silicon Valley. The planes, when they land, they go this way. And we see the fog getting past the mountain range, the ocean being at the horizon, which we don't see, obviously, because the fog is over it. And on the right, still using Summarit 1.5, a good idea of that kind of rendering, light rendering with those non-coated lens elements. Here, using an M8 body with the 50mm f2.5 Summarit-M, it's basically me trying to document the neighborhood, one of those small villages of the Silicon Valley, trying to document the typical houses that are still there, used to be there, and slowly disappearing to let place for larger modern constructions. On the left again, so this 50mm f2.5 on this non-full frame body makes it more like an 80mm. Here on the left, same thing, with the typical vegetation and typical constructions. And on the right, that's using an SL2 body with this Summarit 1.5 lens. That's also, it's just the community next to the one where the left picture was taken. The right picture is in Redwood City, where urbanization has taken place with larger buildings, with flats, and yeah, basically I like the contrast between those two environments. Here again, on the left, SL2 using the Summarit 1.5 lens. Same thing on the right, with this really precise and defined center and kind of blurriness and dreaminess in the periphery. On the left, it's basically a parking space underground. Well, not underground, but a multi-story, multi-level parking space. And on the right, it's one of those industrial environments you can find in that region. The next two pictures, same equipment, same environment with those workshops in a very gray environments, 1 story high, with those electrical lines quite typical of the region, and transformers. Well, trying to document things. And on the right, here we see this kind of swirly bokeh. It's through a window, so basically the window adds some blurriness, but we see flowers, and the swirly bokeh, we can kind of discover it in the background. Talking about that swirly bokeh, on the left picture, we're closer, that's what I was telling before. The Summarit 1.5 on this SL2 gets this really weird bokeh that's hard to use because it really takes over your composition if you if you're not careful about it. But yeah, that gives you an idea of what you could do with it. It's quite, I find it a little bit too present, but it's a very interesting lens nonetheless. And on the right, I have no idea what lens. It's probably using the Summarit 1.5 lens, but on an M8 body. Not sure. Of two palm trees at sunset. Then again, we're going back to lots of pictures. When I travel, I usually take 1 or 2 bodies max, digital, and maybe 1 or 2 film cameras. Here it's the SL2 body with the 50mm Summarit-M lens, so quite precise with a very soft bokeh, but very precise lens. Tried to give an idea of the kind of constructions you find. Basically, it's an earthquake region, so lots of steel-built constructions. That's a parking space, multi-level parking, not the same as the other one, but well. And on the right, I'm not sure about what lens I'm using here. Probably SL2 as a body. It's a region where you find redwood forests, so it's the sun behind some redwoods. They're really huge trees. This picture maybe doesn't give you a sense of the scale, but they're really huge. And well, again here SL2 using the 50mm Summarit-M with its really typical bokeh that I find very modern. Really, to me, an underrated series of lens from Leica. Very precise rendering, not too shallow. Love the color science behind it. And yeah, I like how it renders situations. Again, same equipment here. This precision, not too shallow rendering. Yeah. Nice bokeh, not really very creamy, smooth. And on the right, the vegetation you can find in the Silicon Valley in places which haven't been built too much. And actually, that's my 2 last pictures for that month of February. So yeah, if you have questions or comments, as usual, you can post them below, and I'll try to answer as soon as I can. And I hope you enjoyed, and see you next time.